CWL Anaheim right around the corner, which means pool play will kick everything off on Friday, one of the biggest events in esports and the biggest event that we come to know and love as far as CWL Open events for Call of Duty. A lot to go over, so let's break things down with Pool A. Like I mentioned, CWL Anaheim coming up just in a couple of hours, and if you're anything like me, you've got your watches counting down to it. I don't actually have a countdown for it. I just lied to you. I apologize. But let's go ahead and start breaking some things down. Again, we'll recap what all of the pools look like and talk about them each in specific video by video. So if you're looking for different pools, make sure you go and check out the other videos beyond that. And of course, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel. We're so close to 10,000 subs. I would love to reach 10,000 subs before we get to Anaheim and the break of all that kind of coming out. Let's go ahead and take a look at the pools though before we go too far. OpTic would be leading up with Pool A. They'll be going up against the Heretics, Evil Geniuses, and Denial. Should be a very interesting pool with both Evil Geniuses and Denial on the rise. Of course, that's what we're going to be talking about in this video, so let's not get too far ahead of ourselves there. In Pool B, United is the front runner from placings and their divisional standings, which means that they'll be matched up against Reciprocity, Elevate, and UYU. FaZe Clan sneaking their way in will actually be the leaders in Pool C as the front seed there, and they'll be going up against Splice, Midnight, and Enigma 6. A lot of question marks, I think, for this pool as a whole. We'll talk about that in a future video. And then finally, our CWL London champions will be the head leaders in Pool D, as 100 Thieves will be going up against Gen G and Team Envy and Luminosity, both with kind of chips on their shoulder and things to prove, as both those teams were the teams at London that were making some pretty lengthy losers bracket runs before they were cut just a touch short of making it to beyond the top 4, I guess is the best way of putting it. So let's take a look more specifically at Pool A with OpTic Gaming first. Now OpTic, this has got to feel like a very gifted pool for you, and it's actually interesting because as you took a look at previous pools, this is by far the easiest one that they've had to go up against yet. And honestly, as a whole, as you were taking a look back at the pools, I don't really know if there's a true pool of death here. OpTic in the past have had pools where they were going up against a strong Reciprocity team, a good Team Envy, and United at Fort Worth. They also had to go up against Enigma 6, who gave them a run for their money, Reciprocity again, and then 100 Thieves at London. Since the divisional standings have kind of become more representative of where we actually feel the strength of the teams are over the last 4 weeks, we're actually getting some pools here that should be a little bit easier to predict. At least that would be the goal. Of course, anything can happen. So let's talk about the opponents for OpTic first. As Evil Geniuses, Heretics, and Denial, none of them have really been able to touch OpTic with the exception of Denial, which were able to, in the cross division, take OpTic to 5. They looked a little asleep, I won't lie, at the first bit, and OpTic would then wake up and have no problem. So honestly, if OpTic comes out in true form, you really shouldn't be worried about this. They only lost 2 maps, and none of them were in Search and Destroy, which is great because you should feel pretty confident going into any potential Game 5s. But beyond that, you're taking a look at teams that are also not super great at control, which is where OpTic has been improving, but I would say still considerably that's where they're at their weakest. So that's the biggest thing as I look at this pool as a whole. You see the head-to-head matchups, but most importantly, you compare the control records of some of these teams. Evil Geniuses, 6-20 in the control. Denial, 6-21 in the control. Again, most of those stats coming previous to what they were able to do with their roster mania changes before London. But the only one who's actually proven themselves in the control across a variety of maps has been Heretics, and they're only 14-16. In fact, if you take a look at the averages of rounds per control, OpTic is still in the favor there, where they gain themselves 2.17 on average per map, and they only give up 2.0. That's vastly better than everybody else in this pool. So if you're OpTic, you should be feeling pretty comfortable, and honestly, if you're an OpTic fan, you should be looking at a 3-0 coming into this pool and being the front runner coming out of Pool A. Talking about the Heretics, though, interesting conversations here because, again, a lot of people I feel like are still sleeping on the Heretics simply because of the fact, I think mostly because they usually come out very slow in their pools, with the exception of London because they had, honestly, a very easy pool. But you go back to Fort Worth, they came out 0-3 after having made those changes in their composition and roles, as far as who was running what specialists, that felt really bad, I think, just generally speaking, because they weren't able to put anything together, and then they were able to 3-2 Accelerate Gaming at the time, 3-1 Envy before they would lose 0-3 to 100 Thieves, and they would still finish top 8. They also finished top 6 at London. That was after they were able to make their way into the winners bracket. So what we're coming to expect from Heretics is that they'll do decent at pools, at least they should. But then beyond that, this is a team to expect to do well, at least in their first game of their winners, or potentially, well, at least if they finish in the winners bracket, that's what I should say. They've done well in their first games of the winners bracket. If they get in the losers bracket, they're typically good to beat at least 2 teams. So is this team a top 8 caliber team again? I think absolutely yes. You got to keep in mind that you have to essentially hard veto out Hacienda when you play this squad, specifically on hardpoint, but also they've been looking good there on the search and destroy as well. A couple of losses were ugly in the early parts of the CWL season, but have been one of their stapled go-to maps in search lately. In fact, as you take a look at some of these stats over the last courses, the biggest concern for Heretics, and why I have to go back to the whole OpTic thing and control, Heretics have only won a single control since, wait for it, the second round of the winners bracket at London. The last 2 weeks, they've only won a single control, and before that, they lost to OpTic and United at the control at very drastic measures. They're only able to beat Splice. So again, big concerns for me when it comes to Heretics in the control. However, their hardpoint has been more consistent. We used to have a couple of big blowouts where they would be absolutely destroyed. That's mostly been eliminated. They're typically getting over 150 points per map. There has been one big loss, but that was to 100 Thieves. That was a 98 to 250. Beyond that as well, their search and destroy averages are also relatively good. 4.7 rounds per map given as well as taken away, which is actually good. That's the second best in the pool next to OpTic. So if you're Heretics, you should be feeling pretty favorable going up against teams like Evil Geniuses and Denial. In fact, against those teams, they're 1-0 versus Evil Geniuses with a 3-2 win, and then a 2-1 up against Denial, where the maps were actually a lot closer, 7-6 the totals there. But still, if you're Heretics, I think you should be feeling pretty good about getting out of this group. Evil Geniuses, though, the next team up, don't sleep on them. Again, all of their stats are pretty staggering, but you have to keep in mind that this is a team that's been consistently good across all the hard points, and beyond that, this is a team that's been looking a lot better in the last 2 weeks, where they've gotten vastly better at maps like Search and Destroy. The big concern comes down to, can they find enough versatility to be better at the control? Because yes, they did not do terribly in their 2 weeks of Division A. They went 4-3 in their 7 games of control, but all of their wins were solely on Arsenal. And in fact, all of them were 3-0. So here's a couple things to kind of keep in mind for if you're an Evil Geniuses fan. You're hoping that Revan has worked his coaching magic, and this team has been able to find the same kind of fluidity and the same kind of understanding of more than just Arsenal. You seem to have that locked down. 3-0 win versus UYU, Gen G, Midnight, and Reciprocity. And Reciprocity loves Arsenal control. So that was a big statement, I would say, to finish off their split of Division A. The big problem has been they have an 0-3 on frequency, a map that most of the players on Evil Geniuses previously have only played a single time before they played it in their last divisional split. They have never won a map on Seaside and have only won on Gridlock a single time. That came during the time just after Fort Worth in the Cross Division. That was against Team Envy. So if you're Evil Geniuses, your biggest worry here is, can you get better at the control? Statistics would say if you win the control, your chances of winning the entire set go up vastly, simply because of how the map picks work, but also, of course, because it puts you usually in a 2-1 situation if you're splitting the hard points in search, as you should, because it goes your pick, my pick, neutral pick, essentially, then my pick, your pick. So if you're winning the control, you put yourself in a better spot to win the set. The biggest thing is that this team has not been able to do very well against our other opponents. 0-9 in maps versus OpTic, a 2-3 loss to Heretics. That came a little bit earlier on, as it happened just after Fort Worth. Again, that wasn't quite with this specific roster, but they've never played Denial before. Not that it matters, because again of how recent that roster has been built. So a lot of things I think to kind of look at as far as Evil Geniuses. Do they have the potential of going into the winners bracket from this pool? I think absolutely yes. For me, it just comes down to, I think Heretics is slightly the better team and the more versatile team, but it really comes down, I think, to that matchup, because I don't see Evil Geniuses beating OpTic. I don't see them losing to Denial. So I think this really comes down to the matchup matchup between Heretics and Evil Geniuses as far as who else gets into the winner's bracket. Now, to finish things off at the bottom, Denial. The biggest thing with this squad, they technically hold the worst hardpoint average as far as point differential goes in the CWL. That's kind of a rough stat simply because of the fact that this is a team that we looked at when they were really, really bad before they picked up what is now most of Red Reserve from before. Since their roster changes, they have been better in the hardpoint. They were 1-6 at London. They've improved that to go a total of, they've won, I guess, 5 more maps. They won 5 times in hardpoint, but a lot of their losses were a lot closer than they were previous when the roster before this, that consisted mostly of our French players, were underneath the helm of the Denial banner. Now, again, there's also consideration because will this team even be known as Denial when it goes to Anaheim? Rumors are saying no, but there hasn't been anyone else to pick them up yet, so who knows how this team will be represented. I imagine they'll still be represented as Denial. Here's your free sponsorship, even though you guys are scumbags. So then you take a look at what they've been able to do more successfully. This is a good search and destroy team. They've only lost 3 maps in the search, so you cannot sleep on this team to potentially send this to 5 and have a chance to upset some of these teams. In fact, going to 5 has been kind of a model for them. They won a Game 5 versus Envy, they lost a Game 5 versus Heretics, and they won a Game 5 versus E6, that all occurring in the last 2 weeks of Division B. So if you're looking at this from Denial's perspective, your strength here has to be to try to take Evil Geniuses and Heretics away from their comfortable search picks and punish them, hoping to extend the series. The longer the series go versus Denial, the more scary it gets for their opponents, simply because Denial, I think, technically gets better when they can stretch it to Game 4s or Game 5s. If they come out slow, don't win the first search, I think you could probably scrap this one away. Their hardpoint, again, like I mentioned, has been okay, but it's their control that's been pretty terrible. They've only won 2 maps in the last 2 weeks, and even at this team at London, they were only able to beat Luminosity. So they're technically 3 for their last, it looks to be about 11 games, which is not great. So if you're Denial, you need to get better, I think, just in closing out your hardpoint maps, taking the search and destroys, and try to get better at the control. But still, I don't see this team making it into the winner's bracket. I've got them going 0-3, OpTic 3-0, and then potential, I guess, for Heretics and Evil Geniuses for a 2-1-1-2 in there, or there could potentially be a tie in the mix, depending on how those matches go, I suppose. But it would still be coming down to the head-to-head, I think, generally speaking. Head-to-head between Heretics and Evil Geniuses, that's what you want to look out for. So, interested to see how that goes. That's going to be Pool A, though. Let me know what your predictions are on Pool A in the comments below. Again, make sure you subscribe and ring the notification bell to get little notices when my videos do pop up. It'll pop up in your little YouTube video. You see a little red number up there. You'll be like, oh, look, I've got a notification. That'll be a video for me if you ring that bell. And, of course, we'll catch you guys back for Pool B, C, and D individually. Until then, though, hope you keep holding it down. So long.